Of what the special counsel is alleging is a criminal conspiracy to secretly take classified material out of the Oval Office, bring it down to Mar-a-Lago, and not just put it in a basement, but page after page, Trump is going to his aides and saying, I want new tops for the boxes. I want to have the boxes to be reviewed personally by me. Trump is at the center, a former president directing people in a coordinated campaign to be evasive in terms of what he had on hand about highly sensitive military and national security matters from his presidency.
Want to show people, this is the first page of it, and we note that it's United States versus America against Donald Trump and Waltine Nauta. Now, this is his personal aide, his body man. Tell us why he's included.
He's included because he is alleged to have made false statements to federal investigators about his role and about what Trump did. And there's a real concern, as you can see from the special counsel, that Trump was not only evading the answers from the investigators, but Walt Nauta, this person who served in the U.S. military, was at Trump's side, was effectively, in the view of the special counsel, his accomplice in this widespread scheme. And this wasn't just something that happened overnight. Months and months of them holding back the documents. And this indictment also shows that Trump repeatedly talked about sensitive materials, documents that could have sources and methods on them that reveal how U.S. intelligence is gathered. This is something that's unprecedented in American history. To have an American president accused of effectively going against his own country by compromising documents of this nature.
Let's explain exactly what this is, because as this indictment alleges, these are documents that include defense and weapons capabilities of the United States. Also, information about United States nuclear programs, potential vulnerabilities of the United States and its allies to military attack. This looks like some of the most sensitive United States information, classified information. And as this indictment alleges that at least on 2 occasions in 2021, Trump showed these classified documents to others. One time at the Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, and another time Trump showed a representative of his political action committee these documents. These individuals did not have security.
And there's something very important also to add here. This is not just about retainment of classified material. It's also about an allegation of obstruction of an ongoing federal investigation. Very quickly, from page 21, you have conversations between Trump and his lawyer. Normally, in any case, we never have a prism into what attorneys are discussing with their clients. But in this case, the special counsel said to a federal judge, we believe a crime might have taken place in those confidential attorney-client conversations. We need that material. So Evan Corcoran, Trump's former lawyer, was forced to turn over his voice notes, turn over his notebooks. And here's what they found. Trump told his lawyer on May 23rd, 2022, according to this investigation and indictment, I don't want anybody looking. I don't want anybody looking through my boxes. I really don't. I don't want you looking through my boxes. Well, what happens if we just don't respond at all or don't play ball with the federal subpoena? Wouldn't it be better if we just told them that we don't have anything here? Well, look, isn't it better if there are no documents? This comes directly from evidence between a conversation between Trump and his own lawyer that Trump never thought would get out. Well, it's out here in this indictment.
To summarize, the former president, Donald Trump, is saying to his lawyer, let's just lie and say we don't have the documents.
Effectively, yes. He's saying, what can we do to evade a federal subpoena?
Why is it that the attorney was forced to cooperate and turn over his notes?
Well, we're all forced to comply when a federal judge says you have to turn over your notes. But this is called the crime-fraud exception. They believe that criminal intent might have taken place in the attorney-client conversation. Now, as Catherine and Scott have been reporting, this aspect of the case could be something that's crucial in the coming weeks as the Trump team, as we've been told privately and from different sources, tries to challenge and dismiss this indictment. They'll say that maybe the federal judge and the special counsel overstretched, tried too hard to get all of this material. But at the end of the day, because of the sensitivity of these documents, the special counsel, we're told from our federal government sources, is going to argue it was a necessity to break attorney-client privilege and get these documents.
I want to bring in our senior investigative correspondent, Catherine Herridge, because you have been following this 14-month-long investigation from the beginning that is detailed here. There's also audio recordings of some of these conversations that the president had. What do we know about that?
Well, here at CBS News, we've been able to confirm through a source with direct knowledge of the transcript that there was an audio recording at his club in Bedminster, New Jersey. It was the former president and then some colleagues. It was about an autobiography for a former aide. And in the course of that conversation, you hear this ruffling of papers on the audio tape, and he says, oh, if this record here, this could exonerate me. And we've been able to confirm, and I was told it was central to this indictment, that he says, as president, I could have declassified it. Now I can't, you know, but this is still a secret. And this was a Pentagon memo, Nora, that was about attack plans for Iran. He describes it as very confidential, secret. But the reason this matters from the special counsel's point of view is that it's an admission, an acknowledgement that he had the power to declassify, but in this particular case, he understands almost a consciousness of guilt that this is a record that cannot be shared.
And let's just, on this particular, let's drive down on this Bedminster episode where there is that audio tape. This involved a moment in time when Donald Trump was agitated, angry at Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, because Milley had suggested that the president, Donald Trump, had wanted to attack Iran. And so Donald Trump was telling these individuals who were there, who were helping to write a book of Mark Meadows, well, no, it wasn't me, it was him. Here's the plans right here, correct?
You nail it, Nora. Based on our reporting, we're learning today here at CBS News a lot about the motivation, the why. If you're just tuning into this, it seems like, so he had records at his house. Were they classified? He says they weren't.
Well, aren't they his papers? Why can't he have them?
And the question as a reporter you always ask is, okay, well, why did this happen? What was the motivation for Trump to have these documents? Two things we've learned. One, he was angry about the Russia investigation, so he wanted to take some documents in January of 2021 back home to Mar-a-Lago. But in the summer of 2021, he starts doing some post-presidential interviews. And at that same time, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, is in the public profile a lot. He's being portrayed as someone who was heroic in the view of some of his admirers about how he handled January 6th, how he handled Trump's final days. So Trump's taking these interviews with reporters, talking to book authors. He didn't talk to us for our book, Peril, but he talked to a lot of other people. And in the course of these interviews, some of which were recorded, he starts bringing out documents and saying, Milley was wrong on this, Milley was wrong on that. I know because some of this stuff I have is classified and I have it right in front of you. And based on our conversations with sources close to Trump, Trump aides were looking at the recorders on the table going, he's talking about classified material. It's now on tape. And now Trump aides who were called before the special counsel were forced to turn over audio tapes of Trump discussing classified material that he knowingly had. If you're a prosecutor, that's golden.
I just want to make one point, because as we look at this sort of through a broader prism of the kind of intelligence equities that were involved, there were equities that originated this information or were impacted by this classified information. So it lists
Explain what you mean.
seven agencies in the U.S. intelligence community had information and intelligence that was impacted by what was retained, according to the special counsel at Mar-a-Lago. And they include the Central Intelligence Agency, so that's human spying, the Department of Defense, we've just mentioned, the National Security Agency, this is electronic intelligence.
I'm getting the chills as you're describing
The National
this.
Geospatial Agency is the mapping agency. The National Reconnaissance Office is the super secret spy satellites that we rely on. The Department of Energy and the Department of State's their own Bureau of Intelligence and Research.
Is it fair to say these are some of America's most important secrets?
Well, it's half of the entire intelligence community was impacted by the retention, the alleged retention of these records.
Look at this.
By the former president.
To build on Catherine's reporting here, page after page in this indictment shows foreign countries, allies, and perhaps adversaries, their capabilities militarily in terms of intelligence possibly compromised by Donald Trump having these documents in his home. You have everything top secret, special handling, foreign intelligence, allies' capabilities, military, foreign intelligence, top secret. annotations from foreign intelligence officials.
And some of them are what's called specially compartmented information. These are programs that literally are on a need-to-know basis. People are read in and read off. It's that highly classified.
I want to bring in Scott McFarland, of course, and of these documents, according to the indictment, it alleges that sometimes they were kept in a ballroom. This is a social club. Mar-a-Lago is not a residence. He does stay there. It is a club. There are people in and out of there. They say also not only in the ballroom, a bathroom and a shower, office space, his bedroom, and a storage room.
And granularly, this charging document connects the movement and the organization of these records to Trump himself. It says he was personally involved with packing the boxes. He directed a storage room be cleared to move the boxes in. He had made this defense earlier that it was the U.S. General Services Administration that was packing up all these boxes. I had nothing to do with it. The charging documents make clear he did have something to do with it. But to emphasize Catherine's point, on the next level, he's sharing, according to the prosecution here, these compartmentalized, secure documents with people who don't have security clearances, and they're not inside one of those secure compartmentalized information facilities, one of those SCIFs. It's happening right out in open space.
Do you remember when the raid happened at Mar-a-Lago and there was the spreading of all of those documents on the floor, and former President Trump said, look at the mess the FBI made. But on page 14, there's an image of all the documents that were spilled onto the floor at Mar-a-Lago. And this aide, Walt Nada, takes a picture and says, look at what I found. And one of the documents he found, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but it's what's called Five Eyes intelligence. This is intelligence that is shared with the United States by our closest allies. And the reason this matters, Nora, is that it's probably not our information. It's gathered by our friends. So it's not just a compromise for intelligence that's been owned and generated by us, but it's from our allies. So it's the breaking or the weakening of those relationships potentially as well.
So, and again, not just, of course, the taking of these documents, the sharing of them, but then the question about obstruction, of course, and not returning them and obstructing this investigation. I want to bring in our CBS News legal analyst, Ricky Kleeman, who has been pouring through this as well. And Ricky, what stands out to you?
Well, I think what's out to you, what Bob Cox alluded to, which really has to do with the false. Because one of the things that we learn at page 40, at count 37, has to do with the fact that it looks like Donald Trump caused his own lawyers to file false declarations about what documents were given and what documents were no longer remaining in the home of Mar-a-Lago or anywhere else. So when you get to that, although that is a minor count in terms of ultimate imprisonment, what it does, because these lawyers, by virtue of what we call the crime fraud exception, that if you as a lawyer have a conversation with your client that then goes into the criminal arena, it breaks the attorney-client privilege. Those lawyers would have to be Ricky,
it's difficult to hear you because the Wi-Fi is breaking up. I want to bring in Robert Costa on that point.
And to build on what Ricky was just saying, it has echoes of Watergate. What's that refrain about Watergate we've always heard? It's not just the crime, it's the cover-up. And so much of this indictment is about steps Trump took, in the words of the special counsel, to corruptly scheme, to lie about the documents he had in hand. And to underscore the seriousness of what the former president of the United States is facing, you only have to move to the back of this indictment, where it talks about the max term of imprisonment for all of these different counts. For willful retention of national defense information, 10 years, a decade in prison, max term. For withholding a document or record, 20 years. Conspiracy to obstruct justice, 20 years. This trial, if it happens, could take place during the heart of a presidential campaign next year, or maybe even after the former president wins the presidency again. Under federal law, you can technically serve in the presidency, even if you've been convicted of a crime.
You know, his lawyers have said about these, sorry to go back to the Evan Corcoran notes, that they felt that they were not that damaging to him, that it was a discussion of the left and right boundaries of what was required under the subpoena. But just drilling down into page 34, what it states very specifically is that Trump suggested to Attorney 1 to falsely represent to the FBI and the grand jury that he didn't have the documents. Then it says to conceal the records from this attorney. Then to suggest that the attorney hide or destroy the documents, which would be the destruction of evidence. And then also to say that he was fully cooperating with the grand jury. So the detail here, which we've never heard before, certainly from his attorneys.
Evan Corcoran's a name we're going to be hearing a lot about in the coming months in this country, because I carry around a reporter's notebook. It's small, it fits in your pocket. One thing we picked up in the course of this reporting is Evan Corcoran likes to write notes in large art school-style sketchbooks. And he has a pile of these huge sketchbooks that are blank without the lines in them, and he takes meticulous notes about what Trump has said. And then he goes home at night, supposedly, and listens to records voice notes on his phone about what Trump told him behind the scenes. So you have someone who was hired by Trump not to be a showman, not to be a theatrical lawyer, but to really be a lawyer. And now the special counsel has everything, including testimony from Evan Corcoran about what Trump was saying and doing when he was issued with a subpoena.
We are expected to hear from Jack Smith, the special counsel, at 3 o'clock today, and we will share that with you. Scott, you've also been looking through this.
This case now has an official number. For what it's worth, this historic case is case 23 CR criminal 80101, and it has 3 initials at the end, AMC. That alludes to the judge to whom this case is assigned. That is Judge Eileen Cannon, whose name might ring a bell. She was the same Trump-appointed judge who helped navigate and oversee the challenges of the search warrant last year. This case goes to her. She has the courthouse, or the seat in the courthouse nearest Mar-a-Lago. There was likely, I'm told, a random wheel run, a kind of a computer mechanized judge selection process, but it is heavily weighted for cases in this part of Florida toward Judge Cannon's courthouse and ultimately to her. He appears Tuesday, 3 p.m. at the federal courthouse in Miami. They'd have it in Miami, I'm told, because it's larger, there's more security there, it has a bigger footprint, and can handle a personal appearance from the former president of the United States. An initial appearance happens at 3 p.m. He has to be there for that. There is likely to be an arraignment immediately after. He'll plead guilty or not guilty. They'll talk about release conditions. It could take just minutes, and we always underscore this. No cameras in the courthouse. No booking photos released by the feds, and it's possible he's brought through a private entrance. This all might be invisible on Tuesday.
All right, Catherine Herridge, Scott McFarland, Robert Costa, thank you. Ricky Kleeman as well. Donald Trump has been charged with willful retention of classified information, withholding a record, conspiracy, false statements, and obstruction, according to this 49-page indictment that was just unsealed. We are talking about significant prison time if Donald Trump is convicted. Our coverage will continue on CBS News Streaming, your local news, and tonight we will have a full wrap-up and analysis on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington.
Welcome back. I'm Lana Zak.
And I'm Elaine Quijano.
And we have been watching a CBS News special report on the unsealing of the indictment into former President Trump.
He has been indicted on 37 felony counts related to the handling of sensitive documents found by the FBI at his Mar-a-Lago residence. The president is due in court next Tuesday.
There is a lot to dig into here. We want to bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson to help us with that. Jessica, you've had a moment now to look at this weighty document, this indictment. Tell us about the charges. What sticks out to you?
What sticks out to me is how we're dealing with the most sensitive documents that potentially put us and our allies at risk. I mean, what sticks out to me is that these aren't quote unquote lower level classified documents. These are documents that are, in some cases, people are read in only on a need to know basis. They contain some of the most sensitive information about our country, about our military operations, about our weaknesses, about our nuclear capabilities. I mean, for anybody who thinks, well, this is just a paperwork crime where he took documents back from the office and he shouldn't have had them in his house, this is so much more than that. That's one of the big things that sticks out to me. Another big thing here is that there is a recording where the former president apparently says, and this shows his state of mind, I could have declassified this while I was the president, but I didn't. Isn't that interesting? And it's secret. Of course, I'm paraphrasing here, but that shows his level of awareness, which I think will be part of this case. And then, of course, the other thing here is just the number of counts and how they all go to essentially the same thing, which is this intent to obstruct a federal investigation, to try and make it basically impossible for federal investigators to ever obtain the documents that, again, are our documents and should not be housed at a private club or private residence because they potentially put us at threat.
And Jessica, what else do the facts as laid out in this indictment suggest about, you mentioned a sense of awareness, about intentions here of the former president? There were a lot of questions before the unsealing of this document about what kind of fact pattern might be established here by the Department of Justice. What is it they have had to actually work with in terms of evidence based on the interviews that they have done, based on recordings that have been made? What does all of this, as you're having a chance to digest this along with us, suggest about intentions with respect to cooperating or not cooperating with the government in its investigation?
It's such an important question, Elaine, and I think what it boils down to is there's overwhelming evidence that there was intent not to cooperate, and more than that, there was intent to conceal, to obstruct. Again, of course, we need to be careful that there is a difference between an indictment and a conviction, but let's be clear that the evidence here is quite strong. And it isn't just one piece of evidence. It's not just actions that the former president took. It's not just actions that he apparently asked others to take. And these allegations, which we haven't really even talked about the falsification of documents, where there's allegations that he lied in writing, saying you have government, you have all these documents back, and they didn't. It's all of it put together. It's his public statements. It's the statements that he thought would never come out because they involved his attorney. But a federal judge found that the crime fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege applied. It's no single piece of evidence, even though there are some really damning pieces of evidence here. It's all of it together that paints a picture of willfulness, of intent. And again, that's what you need to prove these statutory crimes.
All right, Jessica, stay right there. We want to bring into the conversation, though, CBS News political director Fin Gomez. Fin, one of the things that we had heard from the former president leading up to this was that this was a witch hunt, that the FBI staged this to make it look like it was worse than it was. But we're seeing here, among other pieces of evidence in the indictment, things that were texted between employees.
It should cause some concern, I'm assuming, from some of the Republican field right now. Also, you have heard this reticence of his rivals to really dive in and attack and criticize the former president for the handling of this case, for the handling of these docs. But after now facing these 37 counts of real significance, at least according to what we've all perused here through these, through these multiple pages, this is significant. And I think that you could be hearing more criticism. You could be hearing perhaps more of his rivals lean into that space. You've heard Chris Christie, the former New Jersey governor, and also Asa Hutchinson, the former governor of Arkansas, who have been openly critical. Asa Hutchinson said that he should end his campaign. Chris Christie said that no one is above the law, and this was before the unsealing of this indictment. So after this, when you're talking about national security and you're seeking the nomination to be president again, will this finally be the cause for potential more criticism from his Republican rivals? It is damning, as has been said.
Yeah, and Fin, remind us, before this unsealing of this indictment, what Republicans, some of them, including the Speaker of the House, had said about the indictment before we had the specifics of it, because, for instance, Kevin McCarthy was one of those who began to close ranks behind the former president. What is it we had been hearing up until this point from elected officials?
Elaine, yeah, I mean, you know, you have heard from the Speaker of the House. You have heard also from Trump's chief rival, if you will, Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, who have talked about how this has been a weaponization of law enforcement by the Biden administration, a weaponization by the DOJ, just trying to target the former president and really aligning themselves with the argument that you've been hearing from the Trump camp about this case. But after the unsealing of this indictment, this 49-page indictment, could that change their argument? I mean, could that change what they are saying? Because this is substantive. This is real. This is significant. Of course, you know, it's all alleged by the prosecution here, by prosecutors here. But this is not the Manhattan case, DA case, if you will. This is not a hush money payments. These are real charges with real legal teeth, if you will. And I think that what you can be hearing, what potentially you could be hearing, is perhaps a changing of that rhetoric and perhaps a changing of that response. But we will see. So far, the early inclination and the early indication that I've been told from sources close to the Trump world is that it is, again, the repeated phrases of a political witch hunt. But we'll see.
Jessica, join us on this. Obviously, this indictment is the case made by the prosecution. These are all allegations at this point. But how does it change the defense strategy? What is the defense strategy at this point for the former president?
Well, it's getting narrower and narrower. And let's be clear about a couple of things. That the former president's first defense was, well, I declassified everything. Kind of two responses to that. One, we now see that he apparently admitted that he did not declassify some of the information here. Two, a lot of the crimes, if not all of them, I apologize for moving quickly, do not depend on whether or not the documents were classified. And so you can still, for instance, convict somebody for obstruction of justice, for portions of the Espionage Act, for conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice, for making false statements, regardless of whether or not the documents were classified in this case. So that's one of the defenses that I think has evaporated. Another defense that we've talked about briefly is the idea that the former president really wasn't at the center of this, that he basically aides packed things up. He wasn't really sure that where documents were. And all of the evidence in this 49-page indictment, again, it is the prosecution's case, but it is strong evidence to indicate he's at the very center of all of this. And so I know I'm not answering your question. I'm really just outlining why I think his defenses are becoming much smaller. He can't claim that he had the right to obtain this information. He can't claim that he thought that he could keep this information. And claiming that it was declassified, he really can't go there, and it really doesn't make a legal difference.
Jessica, as you've been speaking, I see that our CBS News White House producer, Gabrielle Ake, who is traveling with President Biden at an event in North Carolina, actually asked President Biden if he had spoken yet to Attorney General Merrick Garland. This is the exact quote: "I have not spoken to him at all. I'm not going to speak to him. I have no comment on what happened." This again, President Biden talking to our CBS News White House producer. That was in North Carolina. Jessica, what kind of position is Merrick Garland in right now? As sensitive an investigation as this is, as this process continues to unfold and the 2024 presidential campaign continues to get underway, describe for me what that must be like for his office and those working under him, especially on this case and other cases. You know, when they move forward and continue with their work, there is a political element unlike any other before.
Unlike any other before. I think that's worth emphasizing. And I think your question is such a smart one because it really points out why there was a special counsel. There is a special counsel, excuse me, in this case, because Merrick Garland is aware that he is a political appointee. He was appointed by the current president who is running for re-election. and very likely will be running against the former president, who is the subject of this investigation. We now know the target of the investigation and has been indicted as a result of it. So that is why he has said, Jack Smith, essentially, you're it. And that is why you heard President Biden say, I haven't talked to Merrick Garland. I don't intend to speak to Merrick Garland, because what President Biden has said, and what I absolutely hope that he follows through with, is that the independence of the Department of Justice is important. Because again, look at the words, Department of Justice. You do not want the Department of Justice to look like another arm of the White House. That's why I think that we will see President Biden and Merrick Garland essentially stay as far away from each other as possible. And for Merrick Garland, everybody knows he was politically appointed. But if that means that we don't trust the Attorney General, then we need to think of a different way to choose the next Attorney General, because in every administration, that is an appointed position. And at a certain point, we have to trust their judgments, even if they have political implications.
Jessica, I want to ask you a question about the other person who's named here. It's the United States of America versus Donald Trump and Waltine Nata. Walt worked as a valet for the former president when he was in office, and he is all over this in terms of moving around boxes and being involved. Is there a particular legal strategy, Jessica, in having him named as the co-defendant for the former president?
Well, I think part of the strategy behind this indictment is giving the public a very full picture of what's going on and not leaving us, frankly, guessing with respect to a lot of the different aspects here. I mean, let's be clear that I don't know, and nobody except those involved in the investigation know whether or not there were discussions with Walt Nata about potentially testifying against the former president and being granted immunity. So part of this is he is now put on stage, he's put in the limelight, and there may be the strategy to put more pressure on him to try and provide information that would help in the case against the former president. It may be that that's not on the table, that he's already provided all the information that he can because he's legally bound to do so. So the answer is this document gives us a lot of information, but we still don't know the full roadmap to the strategy here.
Finn, if you're still with us, I just want to get a bit of context as well with the 2024 presidential campaign, essentially in full swing or nearing that point now. As we look through this indictment, and one of the things that we heard in the special report a short time ago is the number of intelligence agencies that had been affected, according to this indictment, as a result of what took place, and according to the indictment, and by Donald Trump's actions. They are the CIA, the Department of Defense, the National Security Agency, and on and on and on. Traditionally, Finn, the Republican Party has positioned itself as the party of sort of strength when it comes to national security. Has national security been an issue that has come to the forefront? I know it's still early in this 2024 campaign. Has there been much talk of that on the campaign trail? Because in previous cycles, that has been a focus of Republican rhetoric. And I'm wondering what we've seen so far and whether perhaps this might change some people's political equations based on what is laid out in this indictment.
That's a great question, Elaine, and one that I was actually just thinking of, because frankly, it has been to some degree an issue, a top issue in the discourse of this cycle, but not necessarily at the top of the issues of this cycle. I believe that this could potentially, it could potentially raise that issue of national security to a top one. I think it does give an avenue for his critics and rival campaigns to really see a political vulnerability when it comes to the actions, the alleged actions by the former president in dealing with national security. And just the subject matter here, Elaine, is so significant that and for those You know, and there's been talk of potentially Will Hurd, who's a former Texas Republican congressman and a former CIA operative. For someone like that, who has that CIA intelligence background, could this be a political opening to really discuss and really focus in on national security? I think it does. I think it does have the impact to change the game, if you will, and bring this issue to the forefront.
All right, Finn Gomez, Jessica Levinson, really appreciate all of your insight into this breaking news as we continue to go through these documents and try and understand and bring the very latest to all of you.
We are going to have much more straight ahead, but for now, a quick break. Stay with us. More developments and discussion of this story when we come back. You're streaming CBS News.
I told myself I was okay with my moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis symptoms.
With my psoriatic arthritis symptoms. But just okay isn't okay.
And I was done settling.
If you still have symptoms after a TNF blocker like Humira or Enbrel, Rinvoq is different and may help. Rinvoq is a once-daily pill that can dramatically relieve RA and PSA symptoms, including fatigue for some. It can stop joint damage, and in PSA, can leave skin clear or almost clear.
Rinvoq can lower your ability to fight infections, including TB, serious infections and blood clots, some fatal, cancers including lymphoma and skin cancer, death, heart attack, stroke, and tears in the stomach or intestines occurred. People 50 and older with at least one heart disease risk factor have higher risks. Don't take if allergic to Rinvoq, as serious reactions can occur. Tell your doctor if you are or may become pregnant.
Done settling?
Ask your rheumatologist for Rinvoq.
And take back what's yours.
Learn how AbbVie could help you save.
That thing will tell you your life's potential. I think it's going to inspire people.
From the Emmy-winning writer from Schitt's Creek.
What was your car? Keeler. Like a dancer. Male model. Make it stop.
Comes one of the best comedy debuts in years.
I think I have everything I ever wanted.
Critics are raving. It's an engaging show with big heart.
Maybe you didn't want enough.
A fabulous ensemble cast with genuine big laughs.
Well, what happens next then?
The Big Door Prize, now streaming exclusively on Apple TV+.
If you or a loved one suffers from varicose veins, spider veins, leg pain or cramps, swollen legs, or ulcers on the legs, do not delay your visit to USA Vein Clinics. The treatment only takes 15 minutes and is covered by most insurance plans, including Medicare. If left untreated, these symptoms can lead to more complications. Visit usaveinclinics.com to schedule your consultation with one of our leading vein specialists. That's usaveinclinics.com.
Summertime back then. We didn't have selfies. We made a splash. And fashion was interesting. But while each summer may look a little different, it always tastes great. So reach for your favorite chips and sips. And let's summer.
Welcome to Zulily, a shopping paradise with deals on every scroll. You don't have kids, do you? Yeah. But good deals aren't just for kids. There's stuff for you. You look great. So do you. And don't forget the house. The house is like a best friend to buy presents for. Or the house. Shop Zulily.com and save big on the brands you love. Zulily. Found this part of the deal.
Rain at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
We are continuing to follow this developing story. The Justice Department has unsealed the indictment into former President Donald Trump. Trump has been indicted on 37 felony counts related to the handling of sensitive documents. Again, these documents were found by the FBI during a search of the former president's Mar-a-Lago residence. The president is expected to be in court in Miami on Tuesday.
We want to bring in now CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarlane. Scott, walk us through the severity of these charges. The first 30 so charges are all about the individual files that the president is alleged to have knowingly retained, and then there are charges about false statements, espionage. Give us a sense of what is contained and what the former president is actually looking at in terms of this criminal indictment.
It's easy to get caught up in the fact that this is unprecedented, that it's a former president facing federal charges, potentially sitting for trial before a judge he himself appointed. Unprecedented, it's easy to get fixating on that. But these charges here, in a vacuum, are just so serious. Obstruction, willful retention of national security secrets. His co-defendant, charged with making false statements to the FBI. In any context, this is serious stuff, and the top-line penalty would be decades in prison on some of these charges, individual charges, and $250,000 fines on each of these charges. This is as high as the federal government goes with prosecutions on classified records. We don't see cases bigger than this, at least not often. And it is a former president, so it's not happening in a vacuum. It's happening in modern-day America in a politically toxic environment. He'll face a judge Tuesday afternoon for an initial appearance at 3 p.m. in Miami, the federal courthouse in the Southern District of Florida, the largest courthouse in the Southern District of Florida. There will likely be an arraignment immediately after the initial appearance. He's likely to enter a not guilty plea then. They'll talk about some release conditions, potentially some bond matters. But in all, it should happen in just a few minutes. Then the real work starts, the months of hearings and filings toward a potential trial, one this nation has never seen before. And at this moment, the judges assigned to this case is Eileen Cannon, a Trump appointee who, we've heard her name before, was the judge who presided over the litigation, the challenges to the search warrant itself back in August 2022. She is the judge to whom this case is assigned, at least for now. And this begins before a magistrate or duty judge Tuesday before heading to her.
And Scott, you mentioned next week is the court appearance. Why might the Department of Justice have unsealed this indictment now and not wait until that arraignment on Tuesday?
Yeah, there are two ways to do this. The Department of Justice can file a motion to unseal, which they did today, and here come the records, 40 pages or so, unsealed for America to read, or they can wait for the initial appearance in the arraignment and unseal it then. It was their choice. They haven't explained yet why they chose option A instead of option B, but I can tell you, Donald Trump announced his imminent arrest and court appearance for the world on his social media channel last night, and for nearly 12 hours was controlling the narrative to a degree about this case. Now the Department of Justice, through the special counsel, have given part of their side of the story by releasing these granular and allegedly damning details about what Donald Trump did with the nation's most sensitive secrets, sharing them with people who did not have security clearance, sharing them in areas that were not secured for the release or dissemination or even viewing of sensitive classified information. And they make a point in the charging documents to show that Donald Trump was so personally involved with what you're seeing on your screen, that he oversaw the packing of boxes, according to the charging document, that he helped arrange for the clearing of a storage room to include these documents, that he himself ordered new covers or boxes, covers for the boxes for the documents. The charging document is unequivocal. They're saying Donald Trump not only knew about the records in the boxes, but was part of organizing and planning the collection of them.
And within those documents, we know that there were highly sensitive documents, including discussions of the U.S.'s most vulnerable areas of our military, of our intelligence committee, plans for potential war engagements with other nations. Scott, given all of this, one of the things that you were discussing with our colleague Robert Costa and Catherine Herridge and Nora O'Donnell earlier was that this lays out that the problem wasn't having these documents as much as it was covering up the having of these documents and continuing to flaunt the request to bring it back. Talk to us about how important that might be in terms of the prosecution's moves forward from here, and also how it hurts him potentially politically.
And this is an obstruction case. They're making it clear in their argument here in the charging documents, the special counsel is, that he suggested that his attorney hide or destroy documents before they got to the grand jury. This is a classic cover-up case where they're accusing him of trying to mask evidence, keep evidence away from the investigators. So that's one of the components of this case. It's also something that could be a volatile issue if his political opponents choose to wield it, that you can't be trusted. You're accused of covering up a crime, not just of committing a crime. We've seen any number of statements from any number of federal political figures, Republicans calling this a political weaponization of the Department of Justice by the Biden administration, trying to knock out a Republican challenger in 2024. We noted, and we continue to note, a lot of that reaction was coming out before the charging document was released. We'll see if any of that is muted. The other Republicans running for president have been critical of the prosecution and investigation itself, not their rival for the primary, for the nomination, Donald Trump. And we've heard some Republican congressional leaders, including the Speaker of the House and John Barrasso, a Senate leader from Wyoming, criticize the prosecution, not criticize Donald Trump. The release of this indictment could change that, but there's no indication this is going to be used by Republicans to criticize Donald Trump any more than had been already.
All right, Scott, if you'll stand by, let's bring into this conversation former federal prosecutor Joseph Moreno. He served in the Justice Department in the National Security Division. So the first question, Joseph, I'm just wondering, what is your reaction? I assume you've had a chance to now look at the document, the indictment. What stands out to you based on what we've been discussing here, and we've been seeing the photographs very clearly lay out a fact pattern here that seems to answer a lot of the questions we had up until this point?
Yeah, I think Scott laid it out very well when he pointed out that this is not so much about how many documents were there and what the classification was and whether they were declassified or not. It's more an obstruction case, right? And that becomes a fairly simple fact pattern to understand. The president, former president, took government documents that he's not supposed to take into his personal possession when he left the White House. He then spent over a year fighting with the government in the return of those documents. And at some point when he's faced with a subpoena and responds through his lawyers to say, I've handed over everything, well, guess what? When the FBI raids the compound a few months later, they find over 100 more documents. And so I think we're well past any argument that this was an accident, that this was a good faith mistake, that he thought he declassified these documents and therefore didn't realize he was doing something wrong. What we're seeing in this indictment is a pretty damning set of facts to say this wasn't a good faith mistake. This wasn't an accident. This was a long period of months spent taking efforts to stymie the efforts of the grand jury, which was to recover those documents that never should have been in Donald Trump's hands to begin with. Joseph, I'm just wondering, as I continue to look through the indictment itself, does anything in this indictment suggest why? Why would the former president decide to take documents of this nature and keep them in a place that was not authorized? I mean, is there anything that suggests...
not authorized. We saw a picture of them in a bathroom.
In a bathroom, among other places. I mean, is there anything that suggests why? I'm continuing to look through this, as I know you are as well. It's just remarkable to take a look at those photographs and understand that those were our nation's most sensitive secrets, that there were documents in those boxes that pertain to the Department of Justice, or rather to the Department of Defense, to the CIA, to all of these men and women serving in the armed forces and serving in the intelligence community, charged with keeping this country safe, and those documents were there unsecured.
I mean, the first few pages of the indictment start laying out the narrative that Donald Trump was into collecting newspaper clippings and documents and kind of hoarding things in boxes as maybe mementos. You know, it's really difficult to get into his mind and figure out why he did this. It seems like such an unforced error. I mean, here's a person with resources, with lawyers, with aides, plenty of people to tell you what you can and cannot do legally. And the fact that he did this anyway, and the fact when he probably could at many points have given these documents back and had a sort of no harm, no foul argument, like, okay, maybe I kind of thought I could take these, but I couldn't. Here you go. You can have them back. I think this would never have come to light. I think it would have been a very much negotiated return of these documents, and that would have been the end of it. So the fact that he not just took them, but then took such efforts to keep them, it's baffling why he would kind of walk himself into the situation. And, you know, the first thing I thought of last night when the story broke about the indictment was, my gosh, Donald Trump really has no one to blame here but himself.
Joseph, I want to follow up with you on that point about this being just an unforced error by the former president. Because one of the discussions is where he's talking to a fundraiser, somebody who represents a political action committee for him, and it sounds like just bragging, like, look at this document. This was related to a military operation. You shouldn't be seeing it. He goes on to say, there's the argument that that I expect to hear from the defense is that, yes, he shouldn't have had it, but he was former president. He had access to all of these things. And in all of this, it was sloppy, it was messy, and maybe there were mistakes made, but does it rise to the level of criminality when it was really just him being proud of having been president of the United States and retaining some of these little bits of honor that he felt like he was owed? How does that argument fly?
Well, I think it could. I think we probably will hear that, right, as part of the defense. I think that will be difficult to maintain when you see quotes like the one in the indictment where Donald Trump seemingly indicates he knows he shouldn't have these documents and he shouldn't be showing them to people. So I think it's going to be very difficult now to make the argument that this was a good faith mistake, because here's seemingly the person acknowledging his culpability. And so, again, you don't need to be caught sending these things to a foreign country or giving them to an enemy force. Just the fact that you willfully knew and retained them in a place that was not secure, showing them to people that were not cleared, that's culpability under the Espionage Act. And
so even if there were no negative repercussions, even if nobody then talked about it, none of our secrets went any further than the people that he talked about, it is still
thank
criminal.
Goodness. It would be a lot worse, I think, if that were the case.
But you're saying
right.
is still criminality enough.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right.
Scott, let me ask you about the political environment now. Where does this leave Republicans? Republicans, some of whom had already made it clear that they intended to stand behind the former president. I'm thinking of the House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, even Ron DeSantis, 2024 presidential candidate, also denouncing this indictment. Now that we have the unsealed indictment itself and we have the details as spelled out by the Justice Department here, where does this leave Republicans?
Well, it's just landed, but there's been no indication over the past few days and weeks as we got to this point that any of this is changing Donald Trump's political standing inside his own party. He is an overwhelming favorite right now and an overwhelming leader in the polls as they chase the Republican nomination for the White House in 2024. He has loyalty, to put it mildly, among so many Republicans in Congress, especially U.S. House Republicans. That includes the Speaker of the House, and some of the chairmen of the powerful committees have been powerful Trump surrogates. Nothing, as we got to this point today, despite morsels of this coming out and reporting over the past few weeks and months, has changed the calculus. Yes, there are critics inside the Republican Party of Donald Trump, including some who are actually, challenging him for the nomination, and there are some in Congress. Mitt Romney issued a pretty scathing statement about Donald Trump today, saying he brought this on himself, this charge. But Romney has been critical of Donald Trump for quite some time. The Senate Republican leadership, that's the group I watch most closely. Senator Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, Senator John Thune, also in Republican leadership, and John Cornyn of Texas, also in Republican leadership. Senators Thune and Cornyn, in interviews with me over the past few weeks, have said they just don't think Donald Trump can withstand this and win a general election. They just don't think he's a winner in 2024, in part because of indictments like this that were looming and the other legal problems hovering over him. Mitch McConnell has been critical of Donald Trump, unbridled in his criticism of Donald Trump since January 6, 2021. But that's a minority inside the Republican Party in Congress right now. And even the challengers seeking to dethrone him and win this nomination have not seized upon this in unambiguous terms and said Donald Trump is no longer fit for office because of what's alleged here.
This is such an interesting discussion, Scott, because being well seasoned as a political reporter, you know that there is a front-facing bit of communications speech that is going to be going out from the GOP, but then there's also these internal discussions. If you are a leader in the Republican Party looking to win back the White House, what are the discussions that you are having right now?
Well, you would see an opportunity, presumably. You'd see a vulnerability you can exploit. You're running a campaign, especially a 10 to 12-way campaign where you have so many potential opponents. You look for every opening for leverage and for the ability to gain and galvanize support. Ron DeSantis, in his statements in the past few days, has been critical of the prosecution. Mike Pence, when asked earlier this week at a town hall event whether Donald Trump should be charged, equivocated for a while and then said, no, there's an opening not being taken. The political strategy may be one that they're confident in, but they're not taking this opportunity for political gain.
All right. Scott McFarlane, Joseph Moreno, thank you both. Stay right there. We are going to continue digging in deeper as we have now seen the unsealed indictment against the former president and one of his aides.